especially when we are speaking about lending activity in terms of stock, I think the picture is a little bit misleading. As in the banking sector, we are facing now a quite aggressive cleanup of the balance sheets. And in terms of new volumes, there is a little bit more activity. In terms of new volumes, actually, we are experiencing now quite strong growth in local currency lending, more than 10%, according with the National Bank of Romania figures. So in terms of stock, I think there is some room to go a little bit lower due to the cleaning up of the balance sheets. But in terms of new volumes, I think there is a lot of activity already in local currency. Of course, in foreign currency, there is not too much activity due to the tighter regulation for lending in foreign currency to unhedged borrowers. But at the same time, interest rate for local currency is so low, and the interest rate differential is not too high anymore.
Thank you so much. In fact, we've done also some analysis comparing significant growth rates that we all enjoyed in all markets in Eastern Europe prior to 2009. And one of the biggest differences between those growth rates of 6 or something, 7% that we had before and today around 3, actually is very tightly linked to the lending trends. So in the old days, banks were lending like crazy. And when the day comes, when they all deleverage and clean up and improve their balance sheets, even a small return of lending to markets like Romania could already probably boost GDP by at least 1 percentage point, which would then in that case move Romania probably in the area of around 4+% GDP growth, which would be very nice and actually very comparable to most emerging economies. Catalin, please, I also know you have one slide.
Thank you very much, Nenad. I only have one slide. So I just want to take the discussion slightly in a different direction, simply because I think many of my distinguished colleagues will speak about the competitiveness of the private sector and how to bring growth, how to eliminate and or reduce obstacles to growth to the private sector. But I'll try to talk about the need to improve the quality of policy making in the public sector. And I'm doing that because everywhere the public sector is the biggest spender in an economy. In the case of Europe, the public sector spends anywhere between 35% of GDP and 50% of GDP. So every year the public sector in Romania spends about 50 billion euros. So that's an important figure, and it shows that the quality of this spending, I think, is crucial for the growth of the country, not only in the short and medium term, but also for the long term, because the government finances investments in education, investments in health, investments in infrastructure. So these are investments for the long term, for the next generations. So if you look at, I put there a graph which shows the dynamics of GDP per capita in the number of the new member states over the last 15 years. And one can see that in the convergence process, we talk a lot about the convergence process, is not a given there. Actually, there are countries that converge and there are actually countries that diverge. So for example, if you compare Slovakia there with Portugal, so if you look at the beginning of the graph there, you saw a significant difference between the two in terms of GDP per capita. If you look at the dynamics between then and now, you see that they have gone in completely different directions. Now I think that Slovakia is overtaking Portugal in terms of GDP per capita. So I think that you can see a lot of other trends there. So these dynamics are by no means linear. So the conclusion that I would draw from there is that the quality of policy making over the long term matters substantially for the trajectory of an economy. So I think that I've been an economist for like 20 years, and if I were to say what would be the biggest challenge that Romania faces, I would not hesitate to nominate the quality of policy making and the quality of spending in the public sector. I think this is an area we have to pay significantly more attention and to move from an ad hoc approach to policy making, which is putting off fires that come and go, to systematizing this and taking a long-term approach. And this has several dimensions in my view. One is, very important one, is to clarify what are the long-term priorities for the countries. We keep we see priorities coming and going, but I think it is time to articulate a long-term vision for the country in a systematic way. Is it education that is our biggest challenge? Is it infrastructure? Is it health? Not all the sectors can be a priority, and we are in a situation where allocate limited resources and spending in GDP in Romania is the lowest in the European Union to a number of sectors and getting very little result out of that. So I think there is a perception that in many sectors there is underfunding, which is probably true. So I think balancing a bit this issue should be one of the priorities. The second important dimension would be to move towards what I would call the results-based budgeting or evidence-based budgeting. So I think we should know what we get from investing in various sectors. Like, for example, Romania puts a lot of money in infrastructure. As a share of GDP is the highest in Europe. It's been the highest over the last 15 years. But is the quality of infrastructure or the development of infrastructure correlated with this amount of resources? We need to systematize a bit the way we allocate the resources and measure actually the results, and developing the capacity to evaluate and monitor policy implementation. I think it's a crucial. I don't know of any country in the world, in the civilized world, in the developed world, which doesn't have a performing public sector. So I think the corollary of that is that one cannot expect sustainable convergence over the long term if we don't fix the problems of the public sector. Another dimension related to this is the human management, human resource management. We need to attract good people in the public sector. We need to have put in place the mechanisms to promote them, to reward them, and we then pay them ultimately. It is difficult to believe that one can attract quality people there unless we pay them market salaries, unless we guarantee to them that they are protected from political influence. And there are a number of models in Europe that show that if you put in place some reasonable mechanisms, for example, in the UK, there is a secretary for the civil service who is apolitical, who transcends the political cycle, and the civil service reports to them. So if you have, for example, a dual reporting system, both to the political establishment, which is normal, to your minister and so on, but equally to somebody who is non-political there, I think that's probably one way to go. Another important dimension is to move towards multi-annual budgeting and results-based budgeting. So I think that we should correlate at each level the results that we get with the spending. So we need to come up with quantitative indicators over the medium term for the most important spending areas and measure constantly the extent to which we attain our targets or not, understand why not, and put back in the policy cycle these questions and these observations. And clearly a part of this, a very important part, is to put in place a public investment framework, a coherent public investment framework, which means systematizing the whole cycle of project preparation and implementation, from the concept to pre-feasibility, feasibility, selection and budgeting, implementation, and then impact evaluation. There are a number of good practices, not only in Europe, but also in the emerging markets. We show that if you put in place filters actually to filter project proposals, for example, coming from the line ministries, and implement them and monitor them properly, you get considerable improvements in the way they actually perform. At this stage, we have, as I said, we put a lot of money into public investments, but the way we do it is small allocations here and there, and we end up finishing very few projects. We end up clogging the fiscal space, which is very limited, and as a result, we cannot really complete many of the significant projects that can constitute a boost to economic growth and to private sector development. Another important dimension is in my view, it's an ICT system for the public sector. And I would invite you all to look, for example, at the way Estonia has developed this system. If you have access to internet now, I would recommend you to look at eestonia.com. And you will see there that Estonia, for example, is one of the leaders in the world in terms of the transparency of the decision making and in terms of reducing the transaction costs for the businesses. So you can vote electronically everywhere in the world from your tablet in Estonia. You can register a company in 18 minutes in Estonia. You can actually trace your health records from your telephone there, and you can, and all the decision-making process in the cabinet is paperless, actually. They conduct all business there in an electronic way. I think this is a tremendous tool, actually, to improve the performance of the public sector and the interaction between the public sector and the citizen and businesses. I want to stop there for the time being, but I would be very happy to take questions down the road. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catalin. You highlighted those issues that Romania is facing, but do you see in the next few years that the quality of public spending will improve? Are there any signs that when you communicate with government officials and so forth, this will actually improve in the coming years? Or the second question also related to the long-term vision, as you highlighted. Do you see any positive steps and signs in this direction?
I believe that I'm an optimist. I've been working on these matters for a number of years. And I think that things, they do move in the right direction. But I think that the approach is somehow, there are islands of success. There are initiatives in various places, in various ministries, and I could list some of them. For example, the Ministry of Finance has set up a unit to actually monitor and filter significant project proposals. I think it's a good step there. In the center of the government, the Chancellor of the Prime Minister, they are going to implement now a monitoring and evaluation system for what's called significant for strategic plans for the ministries. There's been a delivery unit set up in the cabinet of the Prime Minister, and there are several other initiatives here and there. Also, the corporate governance agenda in the SOE sector, which I think it's at the beginning, but in my view, at least in some sectors, is moving in the right direction. So I think that the time has come to connect all these dots, and you cannot really have systematic policy making if you don't have in place the institutional setup and the processes there, as well as the quality of people to deliver them. And that means that on one hand, you should look at good practices in Europe. You have to set up a mechanism. There should be some physically a unit, let's say in the center of government, who should take charge of developing these priorities in cooperation with the business community, and there should be that unit should also monitor that implementation. Then there should be a relaxation of the salary scales in the public sector. You cannot have, as I said, competitive civil servants if you don't pay them well, and I think they should be one of the priorities that the government should be looking at.
Thank you. I actually had to smile a little bit when you mentioned this issue of public sector salaries. I know in Austria, where I live, that decision was made a long time ago, and in fact the top ministers in the Austrian government are all around 300,000 euros brutto a year. Half of that goes, by the way, on tax. But it's basically the idea was to equalize the salaries of the top ministers or the key people in the government with what would a CEO of a medium-sized Austrian companies earn. That way you could attract some of the top people to actually go into public sector, and then after that, of course, the quality of decision-making and planning and strategy has actually improved significantly, and that decision was made a long, long time ago, and it actually helped economic development. So it does make sense. I don't know if everybody agrees with this, but it certainly has worked very well in Austria overall. Thank you, gentlemen, for those opening comments on the macro side. I would also like to ask same question to the rest of the panel, which is, how do you see Romanian economic business outlook for the next couple of years? And perhaps start with Bogdan, EY, your views on this and comments, please.
Thank you. So adding to what Ionut and Catalin have said, I'm very happy to see World Bank after 24 years in Romania, continuing to focus on the corporate governance of the public sector, which is a key area for us looking forward. I think there are, I will focus on the opportunities we have, and I think some of these opportunities are in line with global megatrends. We annually issue a report on megatrends, and I believe two of them are important for Romania's growth looking forward. The first one is digital transformation, and we know that this digital transformation is disrupting and affects businesses, changing business models, people models. It brings all in all challenges, but also many opportunities. We are going to live in a mobile-first world. We know that consumer spending via mobile will not just double in the coming 4 years, but will triple from $200 billion at this point in time to 600 billion. And half of the e-commerce will be done through mobile. Digital and robotic technologies are going to replace workers as such. And in the coming 20 years, most probably half of the current occupations in the mature economies are at risk to be automated. I do believe that Romania has strong arguments to play a role in this digital transformation journey and to play at least a regional role. And we do see this happening through the contribution of the ITNC in the last months to the Romania's growth. And we see, and these are good news, R&D centers of excellence relocating in Romania as opposed to call centers. So this is an important opportunity. The second mega trend, which I believe is very important for Romania looking forward, is that entrepreneurship is rising across the world. And these are good news because entrepreneurs are bringing innovation, new jobs, and they are critical for the future growth. What do we see as a trend at the global level is that entrepreneurship evolves from the necessity-driven entrepreneurship towards high-impact entrepreneurship, in particularly in the emerging markets. The face of entrepreneurship is changing. We see that entrepreneurs are younger and younger. 50% of entrepreneurs across the globe are between 25 and 44 years old. We see more and more women entrepreneurs taking the lead. There are not less than 126 million women entrepreneurs who are taking the challenge of leading entrepreneurial businesses. The most significant challenge, not only in Romania, and we saw this in our entrepreneurial barometer, is access to funding. And I'm sure that Ludwik is going to tell us more things about how capital market in Romania can help entrepreneurs to access funds. But as a matter of fact, this is the most important challenge. What do we see at the global level is that crowdfunding and also microfinance is helping entrepreneurs, in particular in emerging markets, to get access to funds, but this requires usually regulatory support. What is critical for Romania looking forward is that the public sector and the private sector is supporting the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And we do see again, very rapid growing markets like Africa, India, or China. We see governments recognizing the roles of entrepreneurs, facilitating their growth, eliminating capital gain taxes, investing in incubators for entrepreneurs, and in innovation hubs. In Romania, at this point in time, we see in the last couple of years at least, there is a lot of energy around entrepreneurship, and we see the private initiative at the level of entrepreneurs helping the other entrepreneurs growing. Also, the public perception is improving, the entrepreneurial education is improving. However, the state is not really helping. Taxation has not helped so far. And what is really lacking, it's a coordination between the three pillars of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is state, entrepreneurs, and corporates. So if emerging markets like Africa, India, or China are helping entrepreneurs, maybe a rhetorical question is why can't we really move to the next level in helping these entrepreneurs? Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe to turn immediately to Ludwik, just for quick opening remarks in terms of where you see the market going, but also the question that Bogdan raised in terms of how companies can access capital, particularly entrepreneurs in Romania. And I know you also wanted to say a few words about privatization trends as well.
Well, I had some thoughts what to say, but I changed it almost completely after what I heard. And I'd like to start by saying that we should all be very optimistic in Romania, having good grounds for this, but also all the time dissatisfied. And it can be, I mean, these two feelings can go together, being optimistic but at the same time dissatisfied. And I very liked all the speeches so far, because in each of them there was this great dose of dissatisfaction. Romania, if I remember correctly, according to the EU Commission forecast, will make 2.6 or 2.7 GDP growth this year. Poland will make at least 3.5. So we can of course say that Romania is one of the leaders, or almost the leader of the growth in the region, but in this case almost represents a big difference. If someone tells me that the fact that Romania will do maybe even almost 3%, I'm not buying it. I'm buying if you tell me that Romania will do 5% or more. Or, alternatively, I could also buy that Romania will do, on aggregate, during or within next 6 or 7 years to come, 25%, like Poland did, more or less, from 2008. Unfortunately, I'm almost ready to agree with our colleague from Raiffeisen when you said that 5% is unrealistic. But on the other hand, Catalin introduced, a category which is extremely important: GDP per capita. So the base in Romania is really low. GDP per capita is almost the lowest in the region. And so this 5% maybe is not that impossible. I think that four steps or four programs should be either launched or continued. And I will unfortunately not speak about, for instance, education, although I'm deeply convinced that this is strategically important, and I fully agree with Catalin. But thinking a little bit realistically, this is the domain where we really should not expect that transforming economies will take care too much of. So being a little bit, maybe more pragmatic, I would say that first of all, conditions for doing business should be constantly improved. And let's do one thing which is relatively simple. Let's make these conditions less bureaucratic, which means less costly. And Estonia may be a perfect example, An e-economy. By the way, Romania has one of the fastest internet connection in Europe, almost like Estonia, which is, I think Estonia is the number one. So we do have resources intellectual resources, intellectual capital, and also even this technicity. But I have the impression that a lot of these resources are used for making things complicated and painful and costly. Second, improving the conditions for the development of the capital market and or more broadly of the financial sector. Why? Why? More or less for three reasons. The first reason is that this is the question of national sovereignty. And these days, I remember a conversation which I had a few years ago in Ukraine with someone who is now one of the prominent figures of the Ukrainian political scene. And he told me when we spoke in Kiev, for us Ukrainians, sovereignty, this is about owning land and having financial sector. We are not capable of constructing an efficient financial sector. Moreover, whatever we have in this domain, we are losing this. He said, in favor of whom, but I will not quote this. So when we lose the financial sector, we will also start losing our land. I think it was quite a prophetical analysis. So this is the first reason. The second reason is that, of course, this is a pillar of any healthy economy, or at least of an economy which wants to be competitive. And the third reason for having a financial sector is that this is something which is relatively easy. Because, you know, Dubai, they do not have oil. They do not have anything in their soil, but they have good regulations. And this is why Dubai is one of the commercial and financial centers of the world. So we need rather, you know, the ability to think and some writing skills in order to have a competitive financial sector. Third item of this program is, of course, to privatize the economy. So we are doing a lot of things in order to improve the regulations of the economy, but we also need to create a pool of assets which will be, you know, attractive for all kind of investors, for the international investors, but we also have pension funds, and this is something which I wouldn't like even to develop this topic. What can happen if they will remain without, you know, investable assets in which they could invest, others than, of course, government bonds. So privatization is a key challenge, key issue, and something which simply must be conducted. And the fourth item, so improvement of the conditions for doing business generally, financial sector, privatization, and the fourth is EU funds. I mean, benefiting from this kind of prosperity, source of prosperity, is much easier than you know, to convince the decision makers that they should also invest in education. And the EU funds are the easiest money. I'm not saying that in absolute terms it is easy to get these funds, but relatively this is really the easiest money. And there must be a reason for which the absorption rate in Romania has been that dramatically low, tragically low. And if it remains as such, And again, I'm not buying if it is increased up to, I don't know, 50% of the funds dedicated to Romania in the current budget of the EU. This should be 95%, not 50. So anything below 95% should be the source of a deep dissatisfaction for us. I will end up, however, with a very optimistic note, because I was dissatisfied all the time, but I said that I should also be optimistic. One of the most optimistic events or news which came to me was this morning when I was driving to Radisson, and I heard on the radio that there is an initiative in the parliament to completely prohibit smoking in public closed places. There was an interview with a lady who is a deputy. I didn't catch her name, and she said that yes, there is a project of the law, and